Welcome to Tainted Trusts, where broken loyalty, hidden betrayal, and poisonous promises are brought into the light. Here, every story reveals the truth behind toxic relationships, family secrets, and the quiet path toward justice. Listen closely, because trust is fragile, but revenge remembers. The first person who called me a predator wasn't HR. It wasn't the woman accusing me. It was my wife. She said it differently, of course. She didn't use that word. She used softer words, more careful words, the kind of words someone chooses when they want to wound you precisely enough to be deniable afterward. But the meaning was the same. I could see it in the way she looked at me that night across our kitchen. 18 years of dinners at that kitchen table. 18 years of reaching for each other in the dark. And suddenly, she was looking at me the way you look at someone you thought you knew and are not sure you ever did. "I believe her," she said. 3 words. I've turned them over so many times since then that they've lost their shape, the way a word does when you say it out loud too many times and it stops sounding like language. But I can still hear exactly how she said them. Not angry, not crying, just certain, the quiet certainty of a verdict. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. I was cleared on a Thursday afternoon, in a conference room on the 4th floor, with a letter I was told to keep confidential. And I drove home thinking that the hard part was over. I was wrong about that. To understand what I mean, I need to take you back to the beginning. Not the accusation, before that. Back to the day a woman named Sarah Bennett started at our company, and I made the mistake of being kind to her. March, 8 months ago. Our office had that particular quality of open-plan spaces everywhere, ambient noise arranged to feel like productivity, the low hum of climate control and keyboards, and people on calls using their indoor voices. I'd been in marketing strategy at Alderman Group for 11 years. Senior director. Not glamorous, but solid. The kind of job where you know where everything is, and people know where to find you. Which, when you're 46 with a mortgage and 2 teenagers and a life built carefully over decades, is worth more than it sounds. Sarah started on a Monday. I noticed her the way you notice anyone new in a small department. Someone who doesn't yet know which printer jams, who takes lunch at noon and who takes it at 1, which conference room has the bad speakerphone. She was assigned to my team as a project coordinator, 2 levels below me, friendly in the way new employees are friendly when they're still trying to understand the room. I introduced myself on her second day, showed her where the good coffee was, not the machine in the break room, which tasted like warm regret, but the pour-over setup that Marcus from Analytics had brought in and left on the counter with a small handwritten sign that said, "Please don't use the wrong grind size." She laughed at that. It was an easy laugh, comfortable. I thought, good, she'll fit in. Over the next few weeks, she fit in the way competent people do, taking on tasks quickly, asking the right questions, not the wrong ones. She had an ease about her, a confidence that read as warmth. People liked her. I liked her, in the way you like a colleague who makes your department function better. I should say this clearly, because it matters. I have never in my professional life looked at a woman who worked for me and thought about anything other than the work. I'm not telling you this to make myself sound virtuous. I'm telling you because it's true, and because the accusation that came later would require everyone around me to decide whether they believed it, and I want you to understand what the truth actually was. She started having lunch in my vicinity. The way it worked in our office, people clustered in loose affiliations, same team, same project, sometimes just same lunch hour. I didn't think much of it. We talked about work, about a project she was struggling with, about a vendor who kept sending the wrong deliverables. Normal conversations. In April, she asked if I wanted to grab lunch off-site. Just to get out of the building, she said. The weather was finally turning. Sure, I said. Grab a few people from the team. She hesitated for just a moment. I meant just us. Easier to talk without, you know how it gets when it's a whole group. Something registered then. Something faint, like a single note played too briefly to name. But she was smiling, and the context was work, and I told myself I was reading things into a straightforward invitation. We went to the sandwich place 2 blocks over. We talked about the restructure that was coming, about her background, about the project. It was fine. Professionally fine. I paid for my own lunch, and she paid for hers, and we walked back and I thought nothing of it. The week after, she came to my office door. I was on the phone. She waited. When I finished, she leaned against the door frame, not in, just at the threshold, and said, with a kind of careful casualness, "I've been thinking about us." I looked up. "About the team," she said immediately. "About how the team works together. I think there's a dynamic problem." I nodded slowly. She was watching me with something I couldn't quite read. Not quite amusement, something more provisional than that. "Close the door," I said, "and let's talk about it." She came in. She sat down. We talked about team dynamics for 20 minutes, and I forgot about the way she'd said asterisk us and the half-second pause before she'd said the team. I shouldn't have forgotten. The lunch the following week was her idea again. The same place. Just the two of us again, because when I'd suggested bringing Marcus, she'd said she really just wanted a chance to think out loud about the project without it turning into a committee meeting, which was reasonable enough. She ordered a salad. I ordered a sandwich. We talked. And then, somewhere between the entree and the check, she put her hand on mine. Not for long. 4 seconds, maybe 5. She said, "I just want you to know I really value working with you, more than just the professional thing." I moved my hand back. I said clearly, "Sarah, I'm your supervisor, and I'm married." She nodded. She looked at the table. "I know I didn't mean," she shook her head. "Sorry, forget it." We went back to the office. She was quiet in the elevator. I told myself it was handled. An awkward moment. It happens. She was embarrassed, she'd course correct. We'd both pretend the 4 seconds hadn't occurred. That afternoon, she sent me a work email about the vendor issue. Professional, precise. I exhaled. The following day, she came to my office again. And this time, she closed the door behind her without being asked. And she said, in a voice that had lost the careful casualness and become something more direct, "I think there's something between us. I'm not imagining it." "You're imagining it," I said. "David, this conversation can't happen," I said. "I'm going to need you to understand that. What you're describing isn't something I've encouraged, and it's not something I'm going to engage with. If you're uncomfortable continuing to work on my team given that, we can talk to HR about a reassignment." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, just that." She left. I sat in my office for a while after she was gone, with that low-level unease that I still couldn't quite name. I thought about whether I should report it myself, go to HR, document what had happened, get ahead of whatever the next chapter might be. I decided I was overreacting. She'd taken the rejection like an adult. It was over. 12 days later, HR called me in. The HR director was a man named Peterson, late 40s, precise suit, the careful, neutral expression of someone professionally trained to give nothing away. He asked me to sit. He offered water. He introduced a second woman I didn't know who he explained was an external investigator the company retained for situations of this nature. He said the company had received a formal complaint. He said the complaint alleged a pattern of inappropriate behavior and sexual coercion. He said the complaint was from Sarah Bennett. I remember the way the room felt when he said that. Not dramatically, no sudden cold, no roaring in my ears. Just a very quiet feeling of the floor rearranging itself slightly beneath my feet. The way the world looks for a fraction of a second, just after you've hit a patch of black ice. I told them what had happened. All of it, the lunches, the hand, what I'd said, what she'd said, the closed-door conversation the following day. I told it in the order it happened, as clearly as I could. Peterson took notes. The investigator asked questions, careful ones, the kind designed not to reveal which answer you were hoping for. I was told to continue coming to work as normal. I was told to have no contact with Sarah Bennett. I was told the investigation would take as long as it took. I drove home. It was a Tuesday in May and the evening was warm, and the suburbs were in that state of early summer ease, kids on lawns, someone's sprinkler cutting a slow arc across the grass. And I drove through it thinking, it will be fine. It's obviously not true. There's nothing to find because there's nothing that happened. The truth is simple and verifiable, and this will resolve itself quickly. I turned into our driveway. The kitchen light was on. Heather was at the counter when I came in, opening a bottle of wine, and she looked up when she heard the door. I stood there for a moment and I thought about just not saying anything. Coming home, saying the day was long, making dinner, letting the investigation do what investigations were supposed to do. Instead, I said, "I need to tell you something." She set the bottle down. I told her everything. The way I'd told Peterson in order, without editorializing, the full sequence of events. I watched her face while I talked. She was very still. She didn't ask questions while I was speaking. When I finished, she looked at the counter for a long moment. Then she said, "I believe her." I stood in my own kitchen, and I looked at my wife. 18 years. I know her coffee order, medium dark, 1 sugar, no milk, which she switched to from cream when she turned 40 and never explained why. I know the scar on her left shoulder from a bicycle fall when she was 9 that she describes as her most dramatic story and uses as an icebreaker at parties. I know the particular way her breathing changes at 2 in the morning when she's had a nightmare but won't wake up and won't admit it in the morning. She said, "I believe her," and I stood in our kitchen and felt, for the first time in our marriage, completely alone. "Heather, I'm sorry." She wasn't looking at me. "I'm not trying to, I believe her. I've just told you what happened." "I know. I told you exactly. I know what you told me." "Then what are you saying? You think I'm lying?" She finally looked at me. Her face was very careful. Not cold exactly. Heather has never been cold, but controlled in the particular way of someone managing a feeling they haven't fully identified yet. "I'm saying," she said, "that I believe her experience of what happened. Her experience of what happened is that I sexually coerced her. That is what she reported to HR. Her experience of what happened and what actually happened are 2 different things." "David, I need you to tell me you believe me." A silence. The kitchen clock made its small sound. Somewhere upstairs, one of the kids moved across their floor. Heather picked up her wine glass. "I think we should wait and see what the investigation finds," she said. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed in our room and I looked at my hands for a while. I could hear Heather moving around below me, the wine going back in the fridge, the television coming on at low volume, the particular sounds of a person making themselves comfortable in an empty room. I thought, I am innocent. I thought, my wife does not believe me. I thought, those 2 things should not be able to exist in the same house. The next 3 weeks introduced me to a version of my home I hadn't lived in before. It had all the same furniture. The same smell, coffee in the morning, whatever Heather was cooking, the vaguely athletic scent of teenagers coming and going. The same sounds. But the emotional temperature had changed in the way a room changes when something has been removed from it. Not dramatic, just slightly wrong, like a word you can't quite remember. The absence more noticeable than any presence. Heather and I didn't fight. That was the thing I hadn't expected. I'd braced for arguments, for the version of this where she confronted me and I defended myself, and we went through the grinding machinery of a marital conflict until something gave. Instead, there was just politeness. The careful courtesy of 2 people who have developed a temporary agreement not to discuss the thing that is actually happening. She slept in our room. I slept in our room. We moved around each other with a precision that had nothing to do with intimacy. On a Saturday, while I was working at the kitchen table, she picked up my phone. I watched her do it. She didn't try to hide it. She unlocked it. She knew my passcode, had known it for years, and she stood at the counter and she scrolled. "What are you looking for?" I said. She put the phone back down, face up. "Nothing." "Heather, I wasn't," she stopped. "I just needed to know." "Know what?" She looked at me with something in her face that I couldn't fully read. Not guilt, exactly. More like the expression of someone who has caught themselves doing something they understand is wrong, but cannot fully stop. "I'm sorry," she said. "That was wrong." "Yes," I said, "it was." I went back to my laptop. Neither of us said anything else. I didn't tell her there was nothing to find. It felt like the wrong sentence. Like conceding that the search was reasonable, which it wasn't. What I felt instead was something settling in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but the beginning of a distance I hadn't chosen. The widening of a gap that I hadn't made. That evening, our daughter Emma, 16, her mother's eyes, my stubborn streak, came downstairs for a glass of water and found us sitting in the living room watching a television show neither of us had been paying attention to for 40 minutes. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at me. "Is everything okay?" she said. "Everything's fine, honey," Heather said. Emma looked at me again, with the particular perceptiveness of teenagers who have been watching their parents long enough to know the difference between fine and its performance. "Dad." "Yeah," I said. "Everything's okay." She stood there a moment longer. Then she went to the kitchen and got her water and went back upstairs. I heard her pause at the top of the stairs. The pause lasted about 4 seconds. Then her bedroom door closed. 2 days later, she came to my home office when Heather was out. She sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair I'd had since my last job, dark green, slightly worn at the armrests. And she looked at me with a directness that made her seem considerably older than 16. "Dad," she said, "did you really do it?" I looked at my daughter. I thought about what it means to be a father. Not the abstract idea of it, but the specific practice. The soccer fields, and the sick nights, and the homework, and the arguments about curfew, and the particular ongoing project of trying to be someone worth looking up to without making yourself into a fiction. "No," I said, "I didn't." She searched my face for a moment. Then she nodded once slowly. "Okay," she said. She got up and went back upstairs. I sat in my office for a long time after she left. The investigation moved the way these things move, slowly, methodically, with the particular opacity of institutional processes that are designed to be fair and therefore communicate nothing until they're finished. My colleague Chris Yamamoto, project manager, my team for 7 years, the kind of man who remembers everyone's birthday and has strong opinions about pizza, had been in the office on the day of the closed-door conversation with Sarah. He'd seen her go in. He'd heard the tone of what happened after, which was not dramatic, which was a normal volume professional conversation followed by her leaving without apparent distress. He'd agreed to give a statement. I found out about it when Chris came to find me in the parking garage on a Thursday evening. "I told them what I know," he said, "which is that she went in there looking like she was going in to have a conversation and came out looking like she'd just been politely told no about something, which is not the face of someone who was coerced." "Thank you," I said. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just telling them what I saw." He paused. "You doing okay?" I thought about the real answer to that question. I thought about the phone on the counter and my daughter at the top of the stairs and my wife sleeping 6 inches away from me with a quality of care that had replaced the ease that used to be there. "I'm managing," I said. He nodded. "Heather," he said carefully. "I'm managing," I said again. He let that stand. The following Monday, HR called me back in. Peterson was there with the investigator again, and this time there was something slightly different in the atmosphere of the room, a marginally lower level of studied neutrality, which in an investigation of this kind is the closest thing to a signal you're going to get. Sarah's account, they said, had contained a number of inconsistencies. Timestamps on emails she claimed not to have received confirmed she'd opened them. A text message from her personal phone, subpoenaed as part of the process, showed a conversation with a friend from 2 weeks before the complaint in which she'd written. He turned me down and it was humiliating. I don't know what to do with that. There was more, but those were the pieces that mattered. The shape of the thing had become visible. I was cleared. Thursday afternoon, 4th-floor conference room, letter marked confidential. I sat in the parking garage for about 20 minutes before I could make myself dry. I thought, it's over. Then I thought about the kitchen, the wine bottle, 3 words in a voice that had been careful and certain and completely wrong. I thought, or it's just beginning. I drove home. Heather was in the kitchen when I came in. She looked at my face, and she understood immediately, the way she had always understood the content of my face before I spoke. "They cleared you," she said. "Yes." She came around the counter, and she put her arms around me, and she held on for a long moment, and I could feel her exhale. This long, shuddering exhale, like something she'd been holding for 6 weeks finally releasing. "I'm sorry," she said into my shoulder. "David, I'm so sorry." I held her back. I held her because she was my wife, and I loved her, and she was genuinely relieved, and the physical fact of her arms around me was a comfort I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge how much I'd needed. And then, when she pulled back and looked at me with wet eyes and relief written plainly across her face, I asked her the question that had been living in me since the night she'd said those 3 words. I asked it quietly, without anger, just needing to know. "If there had been no proof," I said, "no text messages, no inconsistencies, if it had just been her word and my word, would you have believed me?" She looked at me. Her mouth opened slightly. The kitchen clock made its small sound, and she couldn't answer. Not quickly, not slowly. She just stood there, holding my gaze, and could not answer. And in the silence of that, in the 4 seconds, and the 5, and the 10, I understood something I hadn't been willing to understand before. This wasn't about Sarah. This was never about Sarah. "I've never told you," Heather said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened before we met?" I looked at her. "I think," she said, "I need to." She couldn't answer that night, and I didn't push her. I want to be honest about that. I didn't push, not because I was being noble, but because I was tired. Bone tired, the kind that doesn't come from work or insomnia, but from 6 weeks of carrying something heavy in a house where no one would acknowledge how heavy it was. I'd been cleared. I'd been vindicated. And I was standing in my kitchen feeling none of the things vindication is supposed to make you feel. I told her I needed some air. I walked around the block twice in the dark, in the particular quiet of suburban evenings, porch lights coming on, the blue flicker of televisions behind curtains, someone's dog barking twice and going silent. Normal life. The ordinary machinery of other people's evenings continuing regardless. When I came back in, the kitchen was clean and Heather had gone upstairs. I sat in the living room for an hour by myself, not thinking, exactly. More like waiting for something to settle that wasn't ready to settle yet. The word I kept returning to wasn't anger. It was *alone. I had been alone inside my marriage for 6 weeks while everyone around me was deciding what kind of man I was. I'd been alone in the car on the way home from HR, alone at the kitchen table with my phone face up and my wife's handprints figuratively still on it. Alone in every room of this house that had felt safe for 18 years and had spent 6 weeks feeling like the walls were watching me. Being cleared didn't fix that. Being cleared just meant I was now allowed to feel all of it. I went to bed eventually. Heather was still awake. I could tell by her breathing, the particular quality of someone pretending to be asleep, which she'd never been good at. I lay beside her in the dark and I didn't say anything and neither did she. In the morning, she made coffee and I poured a cup and we moved around the kitchen the way we'd moved around it all month. Coordinated, careful, the choreography of people sharing a space while avoiding the center of it. She said, "Can we talk tonight?" "Okay," I said. I went to work. I came home. We sent Emma to a friend's house and our son Tyler to his room with dinner and a movie, which he accepted with the oblivious gratitude of a 14-year-old who had no idea his parents' marriage was sitting on a fault line. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd set it. I thought about pointing that out. I didn't. "I owe you more than an apology," she said. "You don't owe me a transaction," I said. "I don't want an exchange. You give me the backstory and I give you absolution. That's not what this is." "I know." She had her hands around her coffee cup even though the coffee had gone cold. "I just need you to understand, not as an excuse, as a I just need you to know." I looked at her, my wife of 18 years. The woman who knew my nightmares and my coffee order and the way I get quiet when I'm overwhelmed rather than loud. Who had learned that specific vocabulary of me over nearly 2 decades. Who had looked at me 6 weeks ago and said, "I believe her." "Then tell me," I said. "Tell me what you've needed me to know." His name was Greg. She didn't say his last name. I've never asked. They'd been together for 4 years, mid-20s, the serious relationship before the serious relationship, the one that calcifies into an almost marriage without either person quite deciding. They'd moved in together at 24. He'd proposed at 26. She'd said yes. "He was charming," she said, "not with nostalgia, the way you describe a weather pattern. The kind of charming that fills up a room. Everyone loved him. I loved him." She stopped. "He started cheating about 6 months after we got engaged. I found out a year later. I didn't say anything. A woman at his office." She turned the coffee cup a slow half-rotation. "When I confronted him, he told me I was wrong. He said it so clearly, not defensive, not guilty, just clear. Like I was confused about something very simple. He told me I'd misread what I'd seen. He asked me why I was always looking for problems. He said..." She stopped again, swallowed. "He said the fact that I suspected him said more about me than about him." The kitchen was very quiet. "And I believed him," she said. "For another 4 months, I believed him, because he was so certain, and I was so much less certain about my own perception than he was about his version of reality." She looked at the table. "Do you know what it's like to stop trusting your own eyes? To look at something directly and then talk yourself out of what you saw?" I said nothing. I was listening. When I found out the truth, really found out, not suspected, but had actual proof, it wasn't one woman. It had been 3, over 2 years. And he'd been telling people, our friends, mutual friends, that I was paranoid, that I had jealousy issues, that I was going through something. She said the last 3 words with a precision that made them sound like what they were, a preemptive campaign. "So when I finally left, half our friends thought I'd been unstable the whole time, because he'd been building that case for months. just in case. I sat with that. He took the narrative, I said, before I even knew there was one. She looked up at me. I spent a year after that relationship, before I met you, going to therapy, trying to figure out how I'd been so wrong about someone for so long. How I'd let him convince me I couldn't trust my own perception. She paused. And the conclusion I came to, which I know now was incomplete, was that the next time I saw a sign, anything that looked like it might be the beginning of that pattern, I would not let myself be convinced out of it again. I understood then, not immediately, not as a clean revelation that made everything make sense, but I understood the structure of it, the logic, which was not irrational given the experience that produced it. I looked at my wife and I could see, for the first time, not just the woman who had failed me, but the woman who had been failed before, who had been systematically taught by someone she loved that her perception was unreliable, who had spent 4 years with a man who turned out to be a skilled and patient liar, and who had emerged from that with a bruise she'd never shown me. I'm not making excuses, she said. I know. What I did was wrong. Looking at your phone was wrong. Saying what I said when you came home, that was wrong. Her voice was steady, but only just. I know that an explanation isn't an excuse. I know that even if everything I just told you is true, it doesn't justify what I put you through. No, I said, it doesn't. She flinched, just slightly. But, I said, it helps me understand what happened. And those aren't the same thing, but they're not nothing either. She was watching me. There's something else, she said. I looked at her. She took a breath. Greg wasn't the only one, she said. She meant her mother. I'd met Heather's mother, Patricia, Pat to most people, 100 times. Dinners, holidays, the particular textures of a woman who occupied a room with the practiced comfort of someone who had learned long ago to be unobtrusive. I'd always liked her. Quiet, warm, the grandmother who showed up to every soccer game and always brought the right thing. Heather had never told me much about her parents' marriage. I hadn't thought to ask. My father, she said, was not a bad man in the ways people think of bad men. He didn't drink. He didn't hit anyone. He was a good provider and a decent father, and at Christmas he'd cry at the same movie every year without fail. She paused. He also had an affair for most of my childhood, that everyone knew about, that nobody talked about. I was very still. His secretary, which I know sounds almost cartoonish now, but that's what it was. They were together for, I don't know the exact number, 12 years. My mother knew. My aunt knew. I think my grandfather knew. And the agreement, which was never stated out loud, which was simply the atmosphere of our house, was that we would not see it. That the family was the family, and what he did outside it was, whether. Just something that happened. She looked at the table. I was 12 when I figured it out, not from anything dramatic, just from paying attention. The way kids pay attention to everything all the time because they don't have the adult capacity yet to decide what's worth noticing. She stopped. I asked my mother once. I was 14. I said, Mom, does Dad have a, and she stopped me before I could finish the sentence. She looked at me and she said, we don't talk about that. Just that. We don't talk about that. And then she went back to making dinner. Oh, Heather, she wasn't a weak woman. That's the thing. She was one of the most competent, capable people I've ever known. She ran that house. She worked part-time. She remembered everything about everyone. She was the person both her sisters called when anything went wrong. Heather's voice had an edge now, not anger, something more exhausted than anger. She just decided at some point that the cost of knowing was less than the cost of acting. That keeping the family intact was worth what it required her to not see. She was quiet for a moment. I grew up watching a woman I loved and respected practice the daily discipline of not seeing what was directly in front of her. And I watched what it cost her. I watched it in the way she held herself. The particular way she'd go quiet sometimes at dinner. The way she never once talked about being happy in her marriage. She'd talk about being content. She'd talk about being grateful, never happy. I was thinking about Patricia at our table. Patricia at Emma's soccer games. Patricia hugging Heather the way mothers hug daughters, with that particular quality of holding on. So when Greg did what Greg did, Heather said, and I almost didn't see it, almost let him convince me I was being paranoid. I think what frightened me most wasn't him. It was the idea of becoming her, of spending my life practicing not seeing, of passing that down. She finally looked at me directly. And then you came home and told me about Sarah, she said. And something in me, something old and deep and completely irrational, tripped a wire. And I know how that sounds. I know that what I actually had was 18 years of you being exactly who you said you were. I know that you have never, in our entire marriage, given me one actual reason to doubt you." She pressed her fingers against her eyes briefly. "I know all of that. And I still looked at you that night, and I heard that wire trip, and I couldn't make myself trust what I knew over what I was afraid of." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, far off, a car passed on the road. I sat with everything she'd given me, and I let it settle, not into forgiveness, which wasn't ready, and not into understanding that canceled the damage, because that's not how damage works, but into something more complicated and more real than either of those. Something that looked like two people at a kitchen table at 10:30 at night, both of them broken in specific ways they hadn't shown each other, trying to see each other clearly for what might be the first time. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. She looked at me. "Before," I said. "Not now. At any point in 18 years, why didn't you tell me about Greg? About your mother? About any of it?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Because," she said finally, her voice just above a whisper, "I thought loving you meant protecting myself." I looked at my wife. I thought about what it means to live beside someone and believe, somewhere underneath the life you've built, that you cannot afford to let them all the way in. That the price of full trust is too high because you've seen what it costs. The secretary, the text message, the half of your friends who believed his version. I thought about how lonely that must be. I thought about how lonely it had made me. "That's not love," I said. It wasn't an accusation. It came out almost gentle. "What you're describing, that's a managed distance. That's keeping one hand on the door." She looked at the table. "I know," she said. "For 18 years. I know." I stood up from the table. Not to leave, not to walk out the door, not to signal something dramatic. Just because I couldn't sit still with it anymore. I went to the counter, and I stood there with my back to her for a moment, looking at the window over the sink, at the dark outside, at my own reflection faint in the glass. I was trying to decide something, not whether I believed her. I believed her. The story had the specific weight of something that had been carried for a very long time. You can feel the difference between a thing someone has constructed and a thing someone has been living inside. What I was trying to decide was what to do with the understanding, because understanding was not the same as being okay. Understanding was not the same as the 6 weeks being undone. Understanding was not the same as looking at my wife and no longer seeing, superimposed over her face, the look she'd had when she'd said those 3 words. I believe her. I turned around. "I need more time," I said. She nodded. "I know," she said quietly. "Take whatever you need." I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed, in the room we'd shared for 15 years. Outside, the neighborhood made its small evening sounds. I thought about Greg, who I'd never met, who had spent 4 years teaching my wife that her own eyes were unreliable. I thought about Patricia, stirring something on a stove and deciding, for the 1000th time, not to ask the question. I thought about the particular way trauma doesn't stay where you leave it. How it follows you from one life into the next and waits, patiently, for the moment it recognizes itself. I thought about Heather at 24, learning to manage what she trusted. I thought about Heather at 45, still managing. And I thought, she never told me. In 18 years, through everything, she never told me. She had kept that wound like something private. Something that belonged to her and not to us. And I had spent 18 years beside her, thinking I knew her, not knowing this, not knowing that behind the life we'd built together there was a door she'd kept locked, and behind the door there was a woman still flinching at a sound only she could hear. I lay back on the bed. The ceiling was the same ceiling it had always been. I stayed awake for a long time. Our therapist's name was Dr. Anita Reyes. She came recommended by our family doctor, late 40s, office in a converted Victorian near downtown, the kind of space that has been deliberately arranged to feel like no particular kind of space. Neutral colors. 2 couches at a slight angle to each other. A window with gauze curtains that diffused the light into something ambient and directionless. I'd never been to couples therapy before. I had, for most of my adult life, held a quiet and unexamined belief that therapy was for people whose problems had gotten out of hand. That if you were paying attention and working hard and treating the people around you decently, the machinery of a life would maintain itself. I understood now, sitting on a beige couch beside my wife in a room that smelled faintly of eucalyptus, that this was one of the more expensive beliefs I'd ever held. Dr. Reyes didn't start where I expected her to start. She didn't ask about Sarah. She didn't ask about the investigation. She asked us each, separately and then together, to describe what we wanted from being in this room. Heather said she wanted to understand what she'd done and learn how not to do it again. I said I wanted to feel safe in my marriage. Dr. Reyes wrote something down. She had a yellow legal pad, and she wrote on it occasionally in a handwriting too small to read from where I sat. I'd spent 2 sessions wondering what she was writing before I decided it didn't matter. "David," she said in the 3rd session, "you said you want to feel safe. Can you tell me what safe means to you in a marriage?" I thought about it. "That the person across the table from you starts from believing you," I said. "Not credulity, not ignoring evidence, but the default is trust. The starting position is that you know this person and what you know counts for something." She nodded. "And what did it feel like when that wasn't the case?" "Like I was a stranger," I said. "In my own house. Like 18 years of being consistent and present and there didn't add up to anything. Like the math was wrong." I stopped. "Like I could be erased," I said. "By one accusation, from one person who barely knew me, and the person who knew me best just let it happen." Heather was looking at her hands. "Heather," Dr. Reyes said, "what do you hear when David says that?" "That I failed him," she said. "Is that what you hear, David? That she failed you?" "Yes," I said, then. "And also I keep coming back to something. She never told me about Greg, about her mother. 18 years, and I didn't know the most important thing about why she moves through the world the way she does." I paused. "I've been asking myself what that means. Whether it means I didn't ask the right questions, whether it means she didn't trust me enough to tell me, whether both of those things are true at the same time." "Can they be?" Dr. Reyes said. I looked at her. "Both things true at once?" "Yes," I said slowly. "I think they can." "Heather," Dr. Reyes said, "why didn't you tell David about your past?" Heather was quiet for a moment. "I told myself it was because it was old. Done. Because I'd processed it in therapy years before and it didn't need to be part of our life." "And was that true?" "A beat." "No," she said. "Why not?" She looked at her hands. "Because if I told him, if I explained that I'd been trained, essentially, to distrust the men I loved, then he'd know. He'd know that some part of me was always watching, always waiting for the wire to trip." She paused. "And I didn't want him to know that about me. I didn't want to be that person in his eyes." "So you protected yourself," Dr. Reyes said, "by protecting the image." "Yes, and in doing so, I left him without the information he needed," Heather said, "to understand me, to understand why I reacted the way I did. I made a decision for both of us that was only mine to make." The room was quiet. "David," Dr. Reyes said, "is there anything you wish you'd done differently?" I'd expected the question. I'd been sitting with it since the 1st session. "I wish I'd asked," I said. "I've been angry, I have every right to be angry, but I've also been looking at this honestly. And the honest answer is that Heather was carrying something significant for our entire marriage, and I never asked. I knew she'd had a hard relationship before me. She mentioned it once early on, and I didn't push, and she didn't offer more, and we both moved on. I let it be a closed door because it was easier." I stopped. I told myself it was respect, giving her space. But I think part of it was that I didn't want to know something that complicated, something I'd have to sit with. Heather looked at me. "I'm not saying that makes what happened my fault," I said. "I want to be clear about that. What happened at that kitchen table was not something I deserved." I met her eyes. "But I was a participant in the conditions that made it possible, and I've had to reckon with that." Dr. Reyes let that settle. Then she asked, "What would it take for each of you to feel like rebuilding is possible?" Neither of us answered immediately. Outside, through the gauze curtains, the afternoon light moved slowly across the wall. Heather said, "I need him to believe I understand what I did, not just the surface of it, the real cost of it." I said, "I need to know that if there's a next time, if something else happens, something I can't predict, and it's my word on one side and a stranger's on the other, she'll choose me. Not blindly, but with the history of 18 years counting for something." Dr. Reyes wrote something on her legal pad. "That's not an unreasonable request," she said. "No," Heather said quietly, "it's not." She said it looking at me. "Not as a transaction, not as a concession. The way you say something when you finally mean it." In the car afterward, we drove for a while without talking. Not the uncomfortable silence of the month before, something different. More like 2 people sitting with the same weight and no longer pretending it wasn't there. "What she asked," Heather said, somewhere on the expressway, "about what it would take. What I said, I need you to know I meant that. Not as therapy speak. I actually understand. What I actually took from you. I know, I said. Do you believe me? I kept my eyes on the road. I'm trying to, I said. That's the honest answer. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying. She nodded. She looked out the passenger window. That's enough, she said. For now, that's enough. The fifth session was the hardest. Dr. Reyes asked us to talk about the marriage we'd had before May. Not the problems in it, the actual marriage. What it had been. Heather talked about the early years. An apartment in Wicker Park with a radiator that clunked every night at 2 a.m. and a landlord who never answered his phone. How I'd learned to sleep through the clunking before she did. How she'd started a bowl of cereal every morning for a year before we figured out she was lactose intolerant, which she found so funny she'd called her sister to share it. I talked about the first house, the one before this one. The way she'd cried just once when we'd signed the papers, not from happiness, she explained later, but from the sudden reality of permanence. Of having made something that would last. I talked about Emma being born. The particular way Heather had looked at me in the hospital, not romantic, nothing cinematic, just real. Stripped down to the essential person underneath the performance of being a person. I'd never felt so close to anyone. Doctor, Reyes let us talk for a long time. And then she asked, when you describe those years, does that marriage still exist? Neither of us answered. I'm not asking whether your marriage exists, she clarified. I'm asking about that specific version of it, the one you just described. I knew the answer. I think Heather knew too. No, I said. That marriage is gone. Heather's breath caught slightly. Something happened to it, I said. And it can't unhappen. And I think one of the things I've been trying to do through all of this is find my way back to it. To the version that existed before May. And I'm starting to understand that that's not where we're going. Where are you going? Dr. Reyes asked. I don't know yet, I said. Somewhere else, something different. Maybe something better, I don't know. But not back. The room was quiet. Heather put her hand over her eyes briefly. Not crying, containing something. I grieve it, she said. Her voice was very low. The version of us that didn't know any of this, I know I'm the one who broke it. I'm not asking for sympathy about losing the thing I broke. I grieve it. You're allowed to, Dr. Reyes said. Both of you are. I looked at my wife. I thought about the radiator in the Wicker Park apartment. The bowl of cereal every morning for a year. The way she'd cried at the closing. I did grieve it. That specific marriage. The one that had operated on the assumption that 18 years was enough to know a person. I grieved it the way you grieve something you didn't know you could lose until it was gone. Which is the worst kind of grief, because it arrives without preparation. But grief is not the same as done. I'd learned that in the last few months. They're not synonyms. One evening in September, she left something on my pillow. Not a card. An envelope unsealed, with my name written on it in her handwriting. Her actual handwriting. The slightly cramped cursive she'd used since grade school. Nothing like the precise typing we'd both defaulted to for everything in the last decade. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while before I opened it. Inside was a letter, 4 pages, handwritten, on the stationery she'd had for years that lived in a box in the closet. Cream-colored, slightly textured. The kind of thing you keep meaning to use and almost never do. I'm not going to reproduce it here, all of it. Some of it belongs only to me, but there was a section near the end that I've read enough times now that I could write it from memory. She wrote, I've been thinking about what I took from you. Not in the abstract, I mean specifically, concretely, what I took. You came home that night having survived something at work that would have broken most people. You'd been accused of something you didn't do. You'd spent the day in a room with HR while someone described you as a predator. And instead of coming home to the one place where that accusation couldn't reach you, you came home to me saying I believed it. I made the accusation follow you into our house. I made your home the place where it was most true. And I have thought about that almost every day since, what that must have felt like, to have nowhere left. She wrote, I'm not asking you to forgive me quickly. I'm not asking you to forget it or minimize it or decide that understanding me makes it okay. It is not okay. I know that. What I am asking, the only thing I'm asking, is that you let me try to be the person you deserve to come home to. Not because I've earned it yet, but because I intend to spend however long it takes earning it, if you'll let me. She wrote, I finally understand what I took from you, and I'm sorry in a way that words don't reach. But I'm writing them down anyway, because I have kept too many things unwritten for too long. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then I went downstairs. She was at the kitchen counter. The same counter, always the same counter. The geography of this marriage mapped almost entirely in this kitchen. She was making tea, and she didn't hear me come in, and for a moment I just stood in the doorway and looked at her. The ordinary fact of her, 45 years old. The gray she'd stopped fighting 2 years ago coming in at her temples. The particular way she stood when she thought no one was watching. Slightly less straight than in company. Her weight shifted to one hip, her attention fully inside whatever she was thinking. I had loved this woman for 18 years. That was not nothing. I read it, I said. She turned around. She held the mug in both hands. Okay, she said. I want to keep going, I said. With Dr. Ray's, with all of it, I want to keep trying. She nodded. Her eyes had gone bright. But I need something from you, I said. Not a promise, I've stopped putting a lot of weight on promises. Something more than that. I moved to the counter. I need you to actually tell me things, going forward, when something is wrong, when something frightens you, when that wire trips. I need you to tell me, instead of managing it by yourself in the dark. Yes, she said. That's the work, I said. That's what I need the work to be. Yes, she said again, steadier this time. I reached out, and I put my hand over hers on the mug. We stood in the kitchen, in the September quiet. Neither of us said anything else for a while. We didn't need to. Emma graduated in June. We drove to the venue together, the four of us. Tyler in the backseat complaining about the dress code. Emma inexplicably serene in the way teenagers sometimes become serene when something matters enough. Heather checking and rechecking that she had the camera. I drove. The venue was a performing arts center. Big, carpeted lobby. The particular ceremony smell of fresh flowers and auditorium and someone's too strong cologne. We found seats halfway back on the right side. Heather sat beside me. Tyler sat beside her. The woman in front of us had an enormous hat that blocked a partial view of the stage, which Tyler found immediately infuriating in the specific way only 14-year-olds can find something infuriating. The ceremony was long. The way these things are long, processional speeches. The particular slow machinery of calling 240 names one at a time. Heather filmed on her phone for a while and then gave up on filming and just watched. I watched too. Emma in her gown, moving across the stage with the slightly dazed expression of someone processing a thing while it's happening, which is how the best moments always feel. She shook the principal's hand. She took her diploma. She looked out at the audience, not searching for us specifically, just looking. And I thought about the girl who had come to my office and sat in the dark green chair and asked me the most important question anyone had asked me in those 6 weeks. Dad, did you really do it? And had taken my answer and held it and believed it. I thought about what it means to be believed by someone who loves you. The processional ended. People stood. The room filled with the particular sound of 240 families, releasing 6 weeks' worth of ceremony tension at once. Applause and laughter. And someone behind us, saying that's my girl at full volume without embarrassment. We moved toward the lobby. In the push and shuffle of the crowd, Heather's hand found mine. I felt it before I registered it. The familiar specific fact of her hand, which I had held 10,000 times, and which I knew the way you know things that have been true long enough to become part of the texture of your life. I hesitated. 1 second, maybe 2. The length of a breath. All of the last 14 months lived inside that hesitation. The kitchen and the HR conference room and the beige couch and the legal pad and 4 handwritten pages on cream-colored stationery and 2 people sitting across from each other in a diner at 10:30 at night, finally telling the truth. Then I squeezed back. Her fingers tightened around mine. We moved through the lobby and the crowd, holding on. Our marriage didn't survive because I was proven innocent. It didn't survive because she gave me an explanation I was willing to accept, or because a therapist asked the right questions, or because she left 4 pages on my pillow one September evening. It survived because 2 people who had both, in their different ways, been keeping one hand on the door, finally, imperfectly, with full knowledge of what they were risking, let go of the door, and chose each other instead. Not the people they'd imagined each other to be. Not the marriage that had existed before May, which was gone, and which they had mourned and buried honestly. Each other as they actually were. Broken in specific places, carrying specific histories, capable of specific failures, and still, after everything, worth choosing.